They never heard the truth because they were too busy shouting their own lies. At dinner, my dad said, "No man wants a woman who earns less." My brother laughed. "A broke woman should stay single." I sat there smiling, my fingers tight around the stem of my wine glass, pretending the words didn't sting. The whole table joined in, forks, clinking voices blending into laughter that tasted like vinegar. I used to wish I could disappear. Now I only wished they would. They didn't know I'd been listening from the edge of their pride for years. They didn't know that while they mocked me for chasing silly dreams, the very stocks they dismissed as gambling were building something none of them could imagine. By the end of that week, my father's boss would call him, and everything would change. It was one of those Sunday dinners my mother insisted on, family time, she called it. The house smelled of roast chicken and garlic butter. The long oak table gleamed beneath the light of the chandelier. My father, Frank Collins, sat at the head, as always, posture straight, the kind of man who believed control was proof of worth. My brother Luke sat beside him in a tailored navy suit, even though it was just dinner at home. I wore jeans and a soft gray sweater, the one I'd had since college. I could feel the fabric thinning near my elbows. Something about that felt right. I didn't need new clothes to prove anything anymore. Dad poured himself a glass of wine. "I ran into Mike from church today." He began swirling it slowly. "His daughter's getting married next spring. Found herself a nice guy. Solid job. You know what he said? He's proud because she knows her place, she'll let him lead." Luke chuckled, tapping his fork against the edge of his plate. "That's the way it should be. A relationship's only balanced when the man earns more." Dad nodded in agreement like it was scripture. "Exactly. No man wants a woman who earns less, it just breeds resentment. A woman should find stability, not competition." The words landed like small stones against my ribs. My mother Evelyn busied herself with the serving dishes, pretending not to hear. She always did that when Dad got like this. Pretend peace was her armor. Luke turned toward me, the grin on his face polished and cruel. "How's that little startup of yours doing, still chasing app ideas that don't pay?" He said it the same way he used to tease me in high school, half joking, half meant to bruise. My dad smirked, waiting for my answer. "It's going fine," I said quietly, cutting a small piece of chicken, keeping my eyes on my plate. Luke leaned back in his chair. "Come on, be honest. There's no shame in admitting it's not working. You're too smart to waste time on something that doesn't make real money." Dad raised his glass toward him. "Luke's right. Your brother understands business. He's on track to become a partner before he's 35. That's how you do it, honey. Steady job, solid income. You could learn a thing or two." I forced a smile. Maybe I could. Inside, I was thinking about the 3 screens in my apartment, about the quiet glow of charts and market feeds, about the way I'd turned $50,000 into a portfolio worth tens of millions without anyone knowing. They saw failure. I saw data. They saw gambling. I saw patterns. Dad carved another slice of chicken. "You should think long-term. Stocks, crypto, those things aren't real. They're bubbles. You'll lose everything chasing fantasies." Luke grinned. "Exactly. Real success is intangible work. Real companies. Real men leading them." Mom sighed softly. "Let her enjoy what she does, Frank. She's always been independent." Dad shot her a look sharp enough to slice through the air. "Independence doesn't pay bills, Evelyn." I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten. I wanted to throw the truth at them, to tell them that their combined annual salaries wouldn't cover a week's worth of my dividends. But something inside me whispered to stay silent. Silence was my weapon now. I lifted my glass, taking a small sip of wine. "You know, Dad," I said lightly, "maybe some women just prefer building their own foundation." He laughed. "Foundations, sweetheart. You don't build a foundation out of air." Luke joined in, his voice rich with mockery. "You're too soft for finance, Em. Leave the markets to the men who can handle pressure." I smiled even as my heart pounded. Maybe you're right. Or maybe pressure just builds diamonds. Luke snorted. "Cute line. Dad leaned back amused. You've got spirit, I'll give you that. But spirit doesn't get you far without money. The irony nearly made me laugh. If only he knew. Across the table, my phone buzzed quietly in my lap. I glanced down just long enough to see the notification flash, Market Alert Portfolio up 12%. Today. I pressed the screen dark again before anyone could notice. Mom asked Luke about his promotion, grateful to change the subject. He launched into a speech about mergers, profits, and clients. Dad listened like a proud king hearing about his heir. I sat back watching detached. I'd spent years trying to earn that same look from him. I'd finally stopped needing it. Then Dad said it again, softer this time, but more poisonous. A man provides. A woman supports. That's balance. My throat tightened. I kept my voice steady. And what happens when a woman provides, Dad? He smiled, like it was a foolish question. That's not how the world works, Emma. I nodded slowly. Maybe not your world. The silence that followed stretched long and thin. Forks scraped plates. The clock ticked from the wall. Then Luke laughed it off. Relax, sis. Don't take it personally. But I did. Every word of it. Dad's phone buzzed on the table. He frowned, glanced at the caller ID. It's Mr. Thompson, my boss. Probably about the quarterly report. He silenced it without answering. I noticed the name. My fingers froze for a heartbeat. David Thompson. He didn't know that just last week, Thompson's firm had finalized a private funding deal through my holding company, EC Holdings. He didn't know the silent investor behind that deal, his daughter. I hid a smile behind my wine glass. The irony burned warm down my throat. Luke kept talking about his golf club membership and his networking opportunities. Mom nodded politely. Dad looked proud. I sat there invisible and calm, the hum of their voices blurring into background noise. In my head, I was somewhere else back at my apartment, the faint glow of my trading screens lighting the room, the numbers moving like tides. That was my language, my power, my revenge. Mom began gathering plates. Dad leaned back with a satisfied sigh. Good dinner, he said. It feels good to have the family together. Reminds me what matters. Luke grinned. Yeah, family and success, two things you can count on. I stood collecting the empty glasses. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't. Dad looked at me. Emma, you'll figure it out someday. You just need to find a man who can take care of you. I met his eyes. Or maybe I already did, Dad. Me. He chuckled, waving it off like a joke. You always were a dreamer. I carried the dishes into the kitchen. The laughter continued behind me, muffled by the clinking of plates and the rush of running water. Through the window, the Texas night pressed against the glass, heavy and still. Streetlights reflected off the stainless sink. My own face looked back, calm, deliberate, patient. I thought about all the times they'd called me unrealistic, ungrateful, impossible. Maybe I was. But I was also unstoppable. From the living room came the sound of my father's laughter, blending with Luke's voice, bragging again about his latest deal. I dried my hands on a towel, looked once more at my reflection and whispered, "Laugh while you can." The clock ticked behind me, steady, inevitable. In 1 week, that same phone he silenced tonight would ring again. Only this time, his voice would tremble when he answered. And for the first time in his life, my father would understand what it meant when a woman earned more. People think strength is loud. But mine began in silence the night I lost everything. 3 years ago, I sat in my Dallas apartment, the lights dim, the only glow coming from my laptop screen. The subject line blinked like a pulse termination notice. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. My company, the startup I'd given 2 years of my life to, was dead. Funding gone, payroll, frozen offices shut. My name was on the final layoff list. Outside, the rain hit the windows in soft, uneven rhythms. Inside, I was falling apart. On the table were a half-drunk cup of coffee, 3 unpaid bills, and a photo of Ethan, my boyfriend back then, smiling with his perfect white teeth. He came over that night. He didn't bring flowers or comfort, just a sigh heavy with pity. Emma, he said, rubbing his temples, you've got to stop chasing things that don't work. Maybe this is a sign to settle down. Get a real job, something stable. I looked at him, heart heavy. You mean something safe? He didn't meet my eyes. Something that makes sense. You're smart, but... His voice trailed off. No man wants to build a future with a broke woman. That was the last thing he said before walking out. The door closed with a click so soft it hurt more than shouting would have. I sat on the floor for hours, surrounded by silence and debt. My phone buzzed with messages I couldn't bear to read. My father had texted earlier. Told you that startup stuff was nonsense. Should have joined a real company. My brother's reply came moments later. Listen to Dad. You're not built for this world. They were right about one thing. I wasn't built for their world. I was building my own. That night I opened my laptop again. I wasn't looking for jobs. I typed how to survive with no money and fell into the black hole of online finance forums. Buried between threads of desperation and scams, I found a post titled, How I Rebuilt My Life Through DeFi and Stocks. The username read Grace L. Something about it drew me in. Grace wrote about losing her company, her marriage, and her home, and how she'd clawed her way back through knowledge. She wrote, Markets are brutal but fair. They don't care about gender, age, or looks. Just numbers. At 2 a.m, I replied to her post. I didn't expect a response. But the next morning, there it was. If you're serious, she wrote, be ready to learn in silence. Power grows best when no one's watching. That was the start of everything. Grace became my invisible mentor. We never met in person, just endless late-night calls, shared spreadsheets, and quiet advice. She taught me the fundamentals of the stock market, the math behind volatility, and the psychology of fear. The market, she said once, isn't about money, it's about emotion. The rich exploit fear, the poor react to it. I asked her why she was helping me. She laughed softly. Because one day, you'll do it for someone else. That's the only revenge worth having. For months, I lived like a ghost. I worked mornings at a coffee shop pouring lattes for people with jobs they hated and spent nights glued to screens full of charts and graphs. I studied until my eyes burned. The learning curve was brutal. I lost the first $500 I invested, then $1,000. I cried the first time I watched my account hit zero. Grace didn't comfort me. She sent one line, failure is tuition. You just paid for your first lesson. So I paid again and again. Slowly I learned. I learned that greed is louder than logic, that patience is rarer than genius. I learned that the best trades are the ones no one notices. By the 6th month, something shifted. I started seeing patterns, movements that used to look random began to make sense. I caught an early signal in a green energy stock called Solivus. I invested the last $2,000 I had. 3 months later, it tripled. When I told Grace, she didn't congratulate me. She said, good. Now take your profit and disappear. Never trade to prove anything. Trade to build power. Her words stuck. The next year, I lived quietly, methodically. My small wins became bigger. My nights were filled with charts, coffee, and code as I built a system to track stock momentum. I wasn't chasing money anymore. I was building something that could outlast humiliation. When I reached 50,000, I registered a holding company in Delaware, EC Holdings. No one knew it was mine. On paper, it was just another tech investor. In reality, it was me sitting in a cramped apartment surrounded by secondhand monitors and a coffee machine that never stopped buzzing. Grace warned me, the moment you brag, you lose. So I didn't brag. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell Luke. When they called, I kept my answer short. I'm doing fine. It was easier than explaining that I now moved money across markets bigger than their companies combined. At Christmas that year, Dad asked if I'd found a new job yet. I said I was consulting. Luke laughed, calling it freelance unemployment. I smiled and poured more wine. Silence was sweeter than defense. Behind that silence, my portfolio crossed the 100 million mark. Grace and I still talked every week. Sometimes she told me stories about the men who'd once laughed at her. They thought I'd die broke, she said. Now they ask for investment tips. Did you forgive them, I asked once. She hesitated. I didn't need to. I outlived their arrogance. I understood exactly what she meant. One rainy Thursday night, I opened my inbox and saw an email titled Partnership Inquiry. The sender's domain made me blink twice. collinsconstructions.com. My father's company. I read the first line: we're seeking private funding for upcoming infrastructure projects. We hear EC Holdings may be interested. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. I laughed out loud quietly at first, then harder. The irony was too sharp. My father, the man who mocked my every risk, was unknowingly reaching out to his daughter for help. I didn't reply right away. I just stared at the screen, my heart calm, steady. Grace's voice echoed in my head. Don't seek revenge. Let life deliver it for you. By then I'd learned how to wait. I sent a simple message to my assistant the next morning: schedule a preliminary review with Collins Construction. Keep my name off it. Then I closed my laptop, leaned back, and watched the gray Dallas sky outside my window. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was loud. I didn't need it. The world was finally tilting on its axis, and it wasn't the force of my will that pushed it, but the quiet inevitability of the numbers. That night I walked to a small diner down the street. The waitress smiled when she brought my coffee the same way she did every week. You're always working late, huh? I smiled back. Something like that. She didn't know that between sips of black coffee I was watching trades worth millions moving through the market on my phone. When I stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The streetlights shimmered on wet pavement, turning the city into mirrors. I saw my reflection in every puddle, stronger, calmer, untouchable. I thought about Dad's words from years before: stocks aren't real work. And I whispered to the night, that is why this is real work, Dad. The air smelled of wet asphalt and new beginnings. In the distance, lightning flickered across the clouds, bright and brief. It reminded me of something Grace once said: the best revenge doesn't come with thunder. It comes with lightning, silent, sudden, undeniable. I walked home in the rain, my coat damp, my mind clear. That was the night I realized I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Soon they'd come to me. They just didn't know it yet. The birthday banner above the fireplace read, Happy 60th. Dad in shiny gold letters. My mother loved grand gestures, even when the love beneath them was brittle. The house was full that night. Neighbors, old co-workers, uncles who always drank too much. Everyone spoke loudly as if volume proved affection. I stood by the window holding a glass of water instead of wine, trying to blend into the background. Luke was in the center of the room, laughing like a man who owned the air itself. His dark suit fit perfectly, the tie expensive and perfectly knotted. He'd just been promoted to senior associate at his bank, and every conversation somehow circled back to that fact. My boss says the next partner slot might be mine, he announced, grinning. It's about time someone from this family made it to the top. Laughter erupted. Someone clapped him on the back. My dad beamed pride radiating from him like heat. That's my boy, he said. Always knew you'd make it big. Mom touched his arm. Frank, stop bragging, she said softly, though her smile betrayed her. She loved when he bragged about Luke. I sipped my water, feeling invisible. I'd learned long ago that silence was safer than participation. Luke caught my eye from across the room and raised his glass. Hey, Em, he called out. You still doing that little app thing? What's it called again? CoinTrack? I forced a polite smile. Something like that. He laughed. You've got guts, I'll give you that. But seriously, you should join a real firm. I could talk to HR at mine. We could find something for you. Something stable, Dad added, nodding approvingly. Luke could teach you a lot. Yeah, Luke said, smirking. About real business, not those online gambling schemes. Their words slid under my skin like tiny blades. I wanted to tell them I could buy their entire firm with one trade, that their world of real business was built on borrowed money and fragile egos. but I just smiled, the kind of smile that hides both fury and amusement. The crowd shifted toward the dining room, plates clattering as Mom called everyone to the table. The air smelled of rosemary chicken and expensive perfume. I found myself sitting between Luke and Aunt Carol, who spent the first 10 minutes asking if I was seeing anyone serious yet. Luke cut in before I could answer. "She's married to her laptop, Aunt Carol. No man's gonna compete with that." Everyone laughed. I didn't. Dad tapped his wine glass. "Let's make a toast," he said. "To family success and the future." Luke raised his glass, first the star of the show. "To work hard, earn respect, and build something real." The words hung in the air, pointed and deliberate. Mom glanced at me nervously. "Emma's building something real too, aren't you, honey?" Luke chuckled. "Sure, Mom. I'm sure her little hobby's really fulfilling." The laughter came again, gentle but heavy. I looked down at my plate. My fingers hitched to grab my phone to show them the portfolio app that displayed numbers none of them could comprehend, but that would ruin the satisfaction I was saving for later. Instead, I said softly, "Real things take time." Dad leaned forward. "Sweetheart, we just want what's best for you. A woman's future isn't just about money. You'll want someone who can provide for you." Luke snorted. "Exactly. No man wants to compete with his wife. That's not balanced." I tilted my head. "So what you're saying is, men are intimidated by women who don't need them," Luke laughed. "No, I'm saying men don't want to date someone they have to save." My dad joined in, chuckling. "He's right, Emma. Men want partners, not projects." My hand tightened around my fork. Good thing I stopped waiting to be saved. The room went quiet. Even Aunt Carol looked uncomfortable. Dad cleared his throat. "You've always had that temper, just like your mother." Mom looked away, pretending to rearrange the breadbasket. Luke tried to defuse the moment. "Relax, we're just teasing. Don't take everything so personally." I forced a smile. "I'm not. I just think it's funny how men talk about independence like it's a threat." The silence returned for a beat too long. Then Luke's laugh cut through it, forced and shallow. "You sound like one of those online feminists. Careful, or you'll scare off any decent guy." "Maybe that's the point," I said. Dad sighed. "You'll learn when you've signed a real contract, Emma." I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see authority. I saw fragility, a man clinging to rules that no longer protected him from the changing world. Dinner continued, awkward but steady. Luke dominated the conversation again, bragging about a recent merger his team had managed. "Our client portfolio's expanding faster than ever," he said, grinning. "We're making real money, not crypto fantasies." Dad laughed, clapping him on the back. "That's my boy. Knows where the real gold is." My mother smiled faintly, but I could see the flicker of discomfort in her eyes. She'd once been ambitious herself before Dad convinced her to quit her job to focus on the family. She rarely spoke of it, but sometimes when she looked at me, there was something like regret. I excused myself halfway through dessert and stepped outside. The night air hit my skin cool and cleansing. The backyard was quiet except for the chirp of crickets and the distant hum of cars. Through the window I could see them all laughing, Luke, Dad, even Mom pretending to. I watched them the way a scientist observes a test subject, detached, analytical. They thought I was a failure because my success didn't fit their definition. Inside that house, Luke was the golden boy, Dad's reflection proof of the life he wanted the world to see. But I knew something they didn't, that their world was smaller than they realized, and it was shrinking. My phone buzzed. A notification from my financial app, EC Holdings Daily Gain, $32,000, $32 million in a day. I stared at the number until it stopped feeling real. Then I smiled. I thought of Luke's watch, the one he kept showing off, bragging that it cost more than my car. I could buy 100 of them and still not notice the expense. But none of that mattered. Money wasn't the point anymore. Power was. Inside, my father's voice carried through the glass. "I just want my kids to have stability," he said proudly. "Luke's on his way. Emma, well, she'll get there." I whispered to the darkness, "I'm already there, Dad." The porch light flickered, illuminating the wet grass. reminding me that even stability could be unreliable. I stayed outside for a long time watching the silhouettes through the window. The sound of their laughter had lost its sting. It almost felt distant, like a memory already fading. When I finally went back inside, dessert plates were half-empty wine glasses full again. Luke saw me and grinned. "There she is. Thought you'd run off to check your stocks." I smiled. "Maybe I did." He laughed, thinking I was joking. "See, that's your problem. You live in your little digital bubble while the real world happens right here." Maybe I said, picking up my glass. "But you'd be surprised how much of the real world depends on that bubble." He didn't get it. None of them did. The night ended like every family gathering before it, with hugs that felt like handshakes and polite smiles hiding old wounds. As I left, Dad walked me to the door. "You know we only want the best for you," he said again. I looked at him, his graying hair neatly combed, his confidence intact. "I know," I said softly. "But maybe your version of the best just isn't big enough for me." He blinked, unsure if it was defiance or affection. I didn't clarify. Outside, the air was cold enough to make my breath visible. I stood by my car for a moment, looking back at the glowing windows. Inside, Dad poured another glass of wine, Luke basked in praise, and Mom, her back straight and rigid, wiped the gold-rimmed plates. I turned away. The night sky stretched above me, vast and endless. I whispered to myself, "Let them think I'm small. It'll make the reveal that much sweeter." As I started the engine, the radio clicked on a financial report. The anchor's voice filled the quiet car. "Tech stocks surge again today. Analysts credit a mysterious private fund, EC Holdings, for influencing major biotech growth this quarter." I laughed quietly, the sound low and steady. Dad's golden boy had no idea. But soon he would. The apartment was silent except for the steady hum of machines. The air felt thin, metallic, a perfect counterpoint to the roast chicken and laughter of their home. 3 monitors glowed against the darkness, lines of red and green shifting like heartbeats. I sat barefoot on the hardwood floor, coffee gone cold beside me, laptop balanced on my knees. Every number on that screen had a pulse of its own, and somehow it beat with mine. People thought wealth looked like yachts and champagne. Mine looked like sleepless nights, cold takeout, and the glow of a monitor at 3 in the morning. I scrolled through the watch list. Helix Gen up 17%. Solar Axis up 23%. The system I'd built, my predictive algorithm that tracked institutional money flow, wasn't just working. It was evolving. The irony never escaped me. My father thought I was wasting my life playing with numbers. He didn't know those numbers now determined the direction of companies his own firm relied on for contracts. I leaned back, rubbing my eyes. It had been 48 hours since I last slept properly. The constant analysis, the calculations, the thrill of perfect timing, it consumed me. But it also freed me. In this room, I wasn't the daughter who disappointed her father. Here I was in control. I got up and stretched, staring out the window. Dallas at night was a sea of lights. I wondered how many of those stories were like mine, quiet women underestimated, working in the shadows, while the world ignored them. My phone buzzed on the desk. A message from Grace. "Grace, markets moving. Feds hinting at a rate cut next quarter. Watch Helix Gen institutions circling. Me, already on it. Building a bigger position. Grace, don't get greedy. Power's not about how much you win. It's about how long you can stay invisible." I smiled. Grace was always right. The louder you got, the easier you were to destroy. I typed back, "I'm not chasing the spotlight. I'm building the stage." For a moment I remembered Dad's words. "You'll never understand real work until a man teaches you." I had learned that real work wasn't about pleasing anyone. It was about building something that couldn't be taken away. I turned back to the screens. The charts flickered. I executed a trade worth $12 million. My breath hitched, a familiar sharp anxiety from my early trading days. I watched the market shift by a fraction of a percent. The fear was a current running through my veins, but it was a current I now steered. That fraction meant someone somewhere just lost. Someone else gained. At 3 in the morning, I finally stood and poured myself another cup of coffee. My apartment smelled faintly of burnt toast and ambition. I opened a new document on my laptop labeled Future Projects. At the top, I typed Helix Gen. If the IPO went as planned, I'd own enough to influence the entire board. This was how quiet power worked, not through shouting, but through signatures no one could trace. My phone rang. The caller ID made me pause. Luke. I hesitated before answering. Hey, Emma, you up? I figured you'd still be working, he said, his tone casual but patronizing. What's up? Nothing major. Just thought I'd check in. Dad mentioned you're still trying that investing thing. How's that going? Before it all crashes again. I closed my eyes and smiled tightly. It's going fine. He chuckled. You should be careful. This stuff's dangerous. Markets always punish dreamers. I looked at the screen, my profit column glowing green. Then I guess I'm a lucky dreamer. Right? He said, not hearing the irony. Anyway, Dad's thinking about pitching a project to some private investors. He says he might finally expand Collins Construction. You should stop by next week. Be nice to have the family together. Sure, I said. I'll try. Good girl, he said, and hung up. The words lingered like smoke. I imagined reaching through the phone and ripping the patronizing tone out of his throat. Instead, I just looked at my screen. The market at least never called me that. By sunrise, I stood on the balcony, the city stretching below. My phone buzzed again. A news alert, Helix Gen, announces upcoming IPO rumors suggest quiet backing from a mysterious private fund. I laughed under my breath. The timing was perfect. Later that night, back in the apartment, I opened the news again. Luke's firm was listed as one of the underwriters for Helix Gen's IPO. The same brother who mocked me for playing with numbers would soon be working under the numbers I controlled. I sat back watching the lines move on my screen again. My pulse hammered a steady rhythm against the bone of my wrist, a counterpoint to the quiet city. The sleep deprivation made my control feel razor thin, but the adrenaline tasted like absolute power. Here in the dark, the victory was mine alone. I whispered to myself, let them think they're leading. Then I shut off the screens one by one and sat in the dark. The room felt strange without the glow, too quiet, too human. I felt the slow, heavy thud of my own heart, a sound I rarely noticed when the screens were on. But beneath the silence, I could still feel it, the hum of control, the rhythm of inevitability. I whispered one last thought before sleep took me. They think I'm behind, but they're already standing in my shadow. The day my father's company reached out again, I was in the middle of a video call with a group of European investors. My assistant Nora slid a note across my desk without a word. On it, written in her tidy handwriting, Collins Construction urgent funding request. I paused mid-sentence, my mind flicking back to that name. Collins. My name. His name. Excuse me, gentlemen, I said smoothly, muting the call. I'll follow up by email. As soon as the screen went black, I took the note from Nora. Who sent it? A senior representative, she said. Apparently they've been in contact before, but this time they want a full proposal. They're looking for a $30 million bridge loan. Did they mention who owns EC Holdings? She shook her head. No, they just said they'd be honored to work with such a reputable investor. The corner of my mouth curved a brittle, silent thing. Honored. My father had never used that word with me. Set a meeting, I said quietly. But under my alias. No one mentions my name. Yes, ma'am. After she left, I sat there for a moment, staring at the skyline through my office window. It was late afternoon, the Dallas sun turning every glass tower gold. Somewhere my father was probably in a hard hat barking orders, believing he was the one holding everything together. He'd never once asked for help in his life. That he was doing it now meant something was wrong. When the meeting invitation arrived later that night, I opened it without hesitation. I was dressing for a role, the woman who signs the checks. My father had no idea his daughter would be sitting across from him at that table, just not as family, as a lender. The morning of the meeting I dressed differently, not like Emma, the daughter who got mocked at family dinners, but like the woman who owned an empire in silence. A tailored black suit, hair pinned neatly, minimal makeup, confidence, sharp as glass. When I arrived, I recognized the building immediately. The polished floors, the faint smell of sawdust from the workshop downstairs, it was the same place I used to visit as a child holding my father's hand. Back then it had seemed enormous. Now it feels smaller. The receptionist led me to the boardroom. My heels clicked softly against the marble. Inside, a few executives were already seated. One of them looked up and smiled politely. "You must be Miss Lane from EC Holdings." I nodded. "Yes. Thank you for having me." The name Lane was my alias, one Grace had helped me create years ago. She'd told me, if they won't listen to your real name, build another one they can't ignore. And it worked. A few minutes later, the door opened and my father walked in. Frank Collins. Older now, but still carrying that air of authority like it was armor. His presence filled the room immediately. He didn't look at me twice. To him, I was just another investor's representative. "Good morning, everyone," he said, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Let's get started." His voice was exactly as I remembered, steady, commanding, sure of itself. For a moment, a flicker of something soft tugged inside me. Then it was gone. They began the presentation, charts, projections, construction photos. The company was struggling more than I expected. Delays, cost overruns, a major contract on the verge of collapse. I could see it in the numbers, in the anxious glances between his team members. Halfway through, he said, "If we can secure this funding, Collins Construction will be back on track by next quarter. We have a proven record. We just need a partner who believes in American craftsmanship." He looked straight at me then. Not at me, through me. His eyes didn't recognize me at all. I leaned forward, folding my hands on the table. "Your record is impressive," I said evenly. "But your debt-to-revenue ratio is concerning. You've overextended on equipment leases and underdelivered on 2 major contracts." The room went silent. His jaw tightened. "We've faced some setbacks," he said carefully. "But that's temporary." I nodded, flipping through the report. "Temporary setbacks are manageable. Chronic mismanagement isn't." His face hardened. I knew that look. It was the same one he gave me when I challenged him as a teenager. "Excuse me," I didn't blink. "Your financials suggest poor cash flow control and reliance on unstable clients. If you want this loan, we'll need full transparency on your ledgers." He bristled, then tried to smile. "We're a family-run business, Miss Lane. We value privacy." "Then you'll value bankruptcy too," I said calmly. Frank's face went white beneath the tan. He looked down, gripping the edge of the table as if it were the last piece of solid ground. For a moment, I thought he might storm out, but instead, he took a deep breath, his pride visibly cracking. "We'll provide what you need." "Good," I said, closing the folder. "EC Holdings rewards accountability. We're not just investors, Mr. Collins. We're partners. And partners demand honesty." The meeting ended with a few polite handshakes. My father's grip was still firm, still unyielding. "Thank you for your time," he said, looking directly at me now as if trying to read something beneath the surface. "You remind me of someone." I smiled. "I get that a lot." As I walked out, my pulse hammered in my ears. I didn't feel triumph. Not yet. What I felt was inevitability. That night I sat in my office reviewing the updated reports they'd sent. The situation was worse than he'd admitted. 2 projects were on the brink of collapse, one already bleeding money. He'd hidden losses by moving expenses through shell contractors. My father, the man who once lectured me about responsibility, was playing with fire. I forwarded the documents to Grace. Within minutes, she called. "He's in trouble, isn't he?" "Worse than I thought," I said. "He's drowning in bad debt." Grace was silent for a moment. "So what now? Do you save him or let him fall?" I stared at the numbers, the red lines of losses, the irony heavy in my chest. "Neither," I said, finally. "I'll give him the rope. What he does with it is up to him." Over the next week, my team worked quietly to structure the deal. On paper, it looked like any other investment. In reality, I was watching my father's empire hinge on the approval of the daughter he dismissed. On Friday, the contract was finalized. EC Holdings would inject $25 million in capital secured by a majority lien on his company assets. If he failed to repay, Collins Construction would belong to me. I signed the document without hesitation. A single signature, elegant and deliberate. The next morning I called Grace. "It's done." She was quiet for a long time. "How do you feel?" I looked out the window. The sun was rising again, casting long golden lines across my office floor. "Powerful," I said softly. "And sad. Because somewhere deep down I knew this wasn't just business. It was blood." Later that evening, my phone buzzed with a message from Nora. "Mr. Collins called the office. He wanted to thank you personally for believing in his company." I read the message twice. He didn't know he was thanking his own daughter. I turned off my phone and leaned back in my chair, eyes closed. Sometimes revenge didn't shout. Sometimes it whispered through contracts and wire transfers. And sometimes it sounded like your father saying thank you to a stranger who shared your voice. A week after the deal closed, the first storm hit. It started with a phone call from Nora just after dawn. "Emma," she said, voice tight, "Collins Construction missed their first repayment milestone. They're asking for an extension." I stared at my screen, the cursor blinking on an unfinished email. Already, yes. Their cash flow projections were off. It looks like one of their biggest clients pulled out. Which one? Harper Industrial. They were supposed to cover half of Collins's new project. Of course. Harper Industrial, the client my father had bragged about at dinner last Thanksgiving. I could almost hear his voice. "We've got loyal partners. They trust my word." Trust wasn't a currency that paid bills. "Send me the updated financials," I said. "And don't respond to their request yet." When the documents arrived, I opened them carefully. The numbers told a story. My father would never admit delayed payments, over-leveraged contracts, dwindling reserves. The empire he'd spent 30 years building was cracking from the inside like a polished veneer over rotten wood. By the time the sun rose, I was already on my second cup of coffee, staring out at the city. My father's downfall was unfolding like a movie I'd seen coming for years. But watching it didn't feel as satisfying as I'd imagined. It felt inevitable. Grace called later that morning. "I saw the alert," she said. "He's slipping, isn't he?" "He's drowning," I said flatly. She didn't sound surprised. Pride always drowns first. I exhaled slowly. Part of me wants to stop this. The other part wants to let him see what it feels like to fall. Grace's tone softened. "You don't owe him mercy, Emma, but you do owe yourself peace." Peace. The word felt foreign. That afternoon, my father called. For a second, I almost didn't answer. But curiosity or something darker made me swipe the screen. "Emma." His voice was too cheerful, too practiced. "It's been a while. How are you?" I leaned back in my chair. "I'm fine, Dad." You know, keeping busy. We just secured some new contracts. Things are looking up." I could almost hear the lie in his voice. "That's good," I said. "Glad to hear it. Actually," he continued, "I wanted to ask you something. Have you heard of this firm, EC Holdings? They're one of our investors. Great people. They stepped in when we needed it most." I froze, fighting the urge to laugh. "I've heard the name." "Well, I've been trying to get in touch with someone higher up there," he said. "They're strict. Smart too. But I think if I could just talk to the owner directly, I could show them we're worth betting on." My pulse steadied. "Maybe they already know." He chuckled. "Let's hope so. Anyway, how's work?" "Are you still doing those stock things?" "Still doing them," I said. "Good. Stick with it. But remember, don't get too risky. Money's a tool, not a game." "A tool to dismantle you." I thought the coldness spreading. After we hung up, I sat for a long time staring at my reflection in the window. I didn't feel angry anymore, just distant. The revenge that had once burned inside me now felt colder, quieter, like watching frost spread across glass. 2 days later, Nora appeared at my office door again. "You need to see this." She handed me a folder. Inside were photos, unfinished construction sites, idle machinery workers standing around. The projects my father had promised would define his legacy were ghost towns. At the bottom of the folder was a report from our audit team. Collins Construction non-compliance, misuse of funds, potential fraud. Fraud. The word sat heavy in my mind. He's been moving money between shell companies, Nora said softly, to hide losses. My throat tightened. It was the same trick I'd used to protect anonymity, but he was using it to cover desperation. Do we report it? She asked. I closed the folder. Not yet. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on the couch with the lights off, the city glowing outside. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, my father, standing tall, believing he was untouchable. I wondered what would happen when he finally realized who had been holding the other end of the rope. The next morning, I drove to Fort Worth unannounced. The office was quieter than I remembered. A few employees looked up as I walked in, clipboard in hand, pretending to be another auditor. The air smelled of coffee and dust, like a place pretending to stay alive. I found him in his office, pacing behind his desk, sleeves rolled up, phone pressed to his ear. I don't care what it costs, just get it done, he barked, then slammed the phone down. He looked up, startled. Can I help you? Yes, I said calmly. I'm here on behalf of EC Holdings. His shoulders straightened immediately. Oh, right, of course. Please sit. I sat across from him, the same desk I'd once leaned on as a child, coloring while he worked. He smiled politely the way he always did with investors. So what brings you here? I'm here to review the current state of operations, I said, opening my folder. We've received reports of delays and financial irregularities. His face paled. That's exaggerated. We've hit a few bumps, that's all. I slid a page toward him, photos, data, invoices. These aren't bumps, Mr. Collins. These are craters. He looked at the papers, his jaw tightening. We're fixing it. Harper Industrial pulled funding, but we'll recover. I always do. I met his eyes. Sometimes recovery requires admitting you've lost control. For a brief moment, something flickered in his expression, fear. He hid it quickly behind a smirk. You're sharp. You remind me of my daughter. My throat constricted. She must take after you. He chuckled. She's got her own way of doing things. Too stubborn for her own good, but smart. I worry about her, though. She's wasting her potential chasing things that don't last. I smiled faintly. You might be wrong about that. When the meeting ended, he walked me to the door, shaking my hand. His grip was weaker now. Tell your boss I appreciate their patience, he said. We'll make things right. Outside, I stood by my car, watching him through the glass. For the first time, he looked smaller, like the weight of his own pride was crushing him. As I drove back to Dallas, the sky broke open with rain. The sound against the windshield drowned out everything else. That night, I sent one final message to Grace. He's running out of time. She replied almost instantly. Then the lesson's coming. The next morning, my phone rang again. Nora's voice trembled. Emma, you need to see the news. I opened the headline. Major construction firm under federal review for misused federal funds, Collins Construction under investigation. Below the headline was a photo of my father being led into a courthouse, his jaw set, his eyes defiant. I set my phone down. My hand was shaking slightly, a vibration I hadn't felt since the night I lost my own startup. The world had finally caught up with him. The silence felt heavier than ever. This wasn't how I imagined victory would feel. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like the echo of something breaking, and knowing I'd been the one to hand over the hammer. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Inside, I whispered to no one. You taught me everything about power, Dad. You just never thought I'd use it better. The morning after the headlines broke, I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating endlessly on the nightstand. For a moment, I thought it was another market alert, another surge, another victory. But when I saw the name flashing on the screen, Mom, my chest tightened. I hesitated before answering. Hey. Her voice came through thin and trembling. Emma, have you seen the news I have? It's your father. They're saying horrible things, fraud, misuse of funds, investigations. It's all over television. He hasn't eaten since last night. Luke's trying to manage things, but... She paused, her breath shaking. They froze the company accounts. We might lose the house. For a few seconds I couldn't speak. The image of my father being led through those courthouse doors replayed in my mind. The man who'd always stood like iron suddenly looked small. Humans. Breakable. "I'll see what I can do," I said quietly. "Emma, please just talk to him. He's too proud to ask for help, but I know he needs you. He needs a family." Family, the word hung between us, heavy and fragile. When we hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the morning light bleeding through the blinds. My laptop sat open on the desk, notifications pinging with updates from EC Holdings. Stocks up, portfolio surging, profit margins expanding. I was winning on every screen that mattered except the one inside me. By noon, the story had exploded across every major network. Family-owned firm under federal investigation. Frank Collins accused of financial misconduct. Son distances himself as company collapses. Luke was on the local news, his suit perfect, his tone calculated. He spoke carefully about misunderstanding, conveniently ignoring the recent IPO collapse his own firm was underwriting. He wasn't defending Dad. He was protecting himself. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I answered instinctively. "Miss Collins," a male voice said. "This is David Thompson, Regional Director at North Star Bank." The name hit me like a chill. My father's boss. "Yes, Mr. Thompson. What can I do for you?" There was a pause. "I didn't realize until recently that you're the principal shareholder of EC Holdings. We recognize the complexity of the contracts signed with Collins Construction, the complexity only a family member would mandate." I froze. My alias, my shield. How did he know? He cleared his throat. "I'll get straight to the point. I was reviewing the Collins case and I saw the documents. You own the fund that's currently his primary investor." The silence between us stretched. He continued, his tone careful. "I don't know the details of your family's situation, but I thought you should know your father's hearing is scheduled for Friday. If the evidence stands, they'll seize his assets." My hand tightened around the phone. "Thank you for telling me." "One more thing," he said. "I've worked with your father for 15 years. He's made mistakes, but he's not a criminal. Pride, maybe? Arrogance, definitely. But not malice." When the call ended, I just sat there, the sound of his words looping through my head. Not a criminal, just pride. That afternoon, I drove to Fort Worth. The courthouse loomed in the distance, gray and cold under the February sky. Protesters and reporters gathered outside like vultures. I slipped past them through a side entrance, pulling my coat tighter. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed sterile and unforgiving. I spotted my father sitting in the hallway, flanked by 2 lawyers. He looked smaller somehow, shoulders hunched, his hair more gray than I remembered. He didn't see me at first. I watched as he rubbed his temples, his jaw tight. When he finally looked up, his eyes met mine, and for a moment the years between us vanished. "Emma," he whispered. I walked toward him slowly. "Hi, Dad." He stood trying to smile. "You shouldn't be here." "Maybe not," I said. "But I am." He exhaled. "It's not what it looks like. They're twisting everything. I just made some bad calls." "I know," I said softly. "I've seen the reports." His brow furrowed. "You've seen them?" How I met his gaze, calm but unflinching. "Because they came across my desk." Confusion crossed his face, followed by realization. His voice cracked. "EC Holdings." I nodded. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air felt thick, the truth hanging heavy between us. He sank back into his chair, staring at the floor. "So it was you, all this time?" "Yes." He laughed once, bitter and quiet. "My own daughter. The one I told to give up on dreams." "I didn't do this to hurt you," I said. "I invested to save the company. You were too proud to take a real loan. You insisted on chasing tangible work, Dad. I just let the numbers talk." He looked up, eyes glistening. "You think I don't know that? You think I haven't been punishing myself every day since it started falling apart?" His voice broke, and for the first time in my life, I saw him not as my father, but as a man tired, flawed, frightened. I sat beside him. You could have told me. I didn't want you to see me like this, he whispered. Weak, beaten. I smiled faintly. You never let me see you any other way either. We sat in silence for a while, the echo of footsteps in the hallway filling the space between us. Finally, he said, I'm proud of you, you know, even if it kills me to admit it. I swallowed hard. You don't have to be proud, Dad. Just be honest. He nodded slowly. Maybe honesty's all that's left. When the hearing began, I didn't go inside. I waited outside the courtroom, listening to the muffled voices beyond the door. My phone buzzed again, messages from Grace, from Nora, from journalists who somehow already knew my name. The secret was unraveling. By evening, the headlines had changed again. EC Holdings revealed billionaire investor behind the Collins bailout is his daughter. The photos came next, me walking beside him, hand on his arm. The story wrote itself, estranged daughter saves disgraced father. The internet loved it. The irony, the redemption, the reversal, it was perfect. But the reality was quieter, messier. Humans. Back home, I sat on my balcony as the city lights flickered below. My phone wouldn't stop ringing, but I didn't answer. I just watched the night breathe around me. Grace called eventually. So the world knows, she said. How do you feel exposed? I said honestly. Relieved. Maybe both. You gave him a second chance, she said. That's power, Emma. Not revenge. Power. I didn't reply. Below, somewhere in the sprawl of the city, my father was probably sitting in his empty office wondering how it had all come to this. I thought of all the years he'd spent teaching me how to be tough, how to never show weakness, and how in the end it was his own inability to bend that broke him. As the wind picked up, I whispered to myself, You were wrong, Dad. A man doesn't make a woman stronger. Pain does. And I learned from the best. The phone buzzed again, this time a new message. From my father. Thank you for saving me when I didn't deserve it. I stared at the words for a long time before typing back. You didn't raise a weak woman, Dad. You raised a mirror. Then I set the phone down, turned toward the city, and let the quiet swallow me whole. 2 days after the story went public, the calls wouldn't stop. Reporters, analysts, investors, everyone wanted a statement. They called me the hidden billionaire, the woman who had silently outmaneuvered her father's empire and then saved it, but I didn't feel like a headline. I felt like someone standing in the quiet aftermath of an earthquake, half in awe, half afraid of what came next. By Monday morning, my office looked like a newsroom. Nora stood by the window, reading emails out loud. Forbes wants an interview. CNBC too. Wall Street Journal is asking for a quote about female leadership and generational revenge. She hesitated at the last part, glancing up at me. Their words, not mine. I smirked faintly. Of course it is. Grace called a few minutes later, voice buzzing with excitement. You're everywhere, Emma. Your face, your story, your quotes. It's all over financial media. They're calling you the symbol of modern justice, the daughter who turned humiliation into power. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the skyline outside my office. Justice, I said softly. Funny how they dress revenge up with prettier words. Grace laughed. Well, justice sells better than revenge. But even she could hear it in my tone, the exhaustion. The weight that came when a private victory became public spectacle. By afternoon, the media frenzy had reached its peak. Networks replayed the same clip of my father leaving the courthouse beside me, his face pale but composed. The reporters had captured the moment he looked at me, not as his daughter and as the woman who had quietly become his savior. That evening, I received an unexpected call. Miss Collins, the voice said, low and formal. This is Robert Hale, chairman of North Star Bank. We'd like to invite you to a private shareholders meeting this Friday. Your insight into the Collins case and your leadership at EC Holdings has caught our attention. I hesitated. A shareholders meeting, why? He chuckled softly. Because your father's position is under review, and some of us believe there's someone better suited to help stabilize what remains of his division. It took me a moment to process what he was implying. You mean, me? Yes, Miss Collins. You. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, the irony settling over me like a slow wave. The same institution where my father had built his name was now inviting his daughter to take his place. Later that night, I drove to my parents' house. The driveway lights were dim, the porch empty. Inside the house smelled faintly of dust and cold coffee. I found him in his study, sitting in the dark, the TV flickering on mute. He looked up when I entered. You shouldn't have come. Maybe not, I said, stepping closer. But I did. He gestured toward the stack of papers on his desk, bank statements, letters, legal notices. They're taking everything. The contracts, the office, the trucks, it's all gone. I glanced at the documents, then back at him. They're not taking everything. Not yet. He laughed once hollow. Don't sugarcoat it, Emma. I'm finished. Your brother's already distancing himself. He even called Robert Hale to clarify that his firm's underwriting was completely separate from my construction mess. Smart boy protecting his golden reputation. I felt a pang of anger at Luke's name. He'll protect himself first. Always has. He sighed, rubbing his temples. I can't blame him. That's what I taught you both to survive. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the muted television. Then I said, There's a meeting Friday. At North Star. They're reviewing your position. His eyes flickered. And what does that mean? It means they're considering replacing you, I said quietly. With me. The words hung there sharp and unreal. He stared at me, unblinking. Then slowly a bitter smile crept across his face. Of course they are. The golden daughter. The stock genius. The one I told to stop dreaming. Don't, I said softly. This isn't about revenge. He shook his head. Isn't it? You think I don't see it? The headlines, the whispers, how the world loves watching the arrogant man brought low by his own daughter? I swallowed hard. I didn't plan it this way. He leaned back in his chair, eyes glinting in the dim light. No. But you let it happen. And maybe that's worse. His words stung, but I didn't argue. Because deep down, part of me wondered if he was right. When I left that night, the air outside was cold and heavy. The street lamps cast long shadows across the lawn, and for the first time, the house I grew up in looked like a memory I no longer belonged to. On the drive back to Dallas, my mind raced with questions I couldn't quiet. Could I really take his place? And if I did, what would it make me? Friday came faster than I expected. The North Star headquarters loomed tall and glassy under the morning sun. I arrived early, every step of my heels echoing through the marble lobby. The boardroom was filled with men in suits, their faces familiar from years of business articles and conferences. My father sat at the far end of the table, shoulders squared, but hands trembling slightly against the polished wood. Miss Collins, Robert Hale said warmly, rising to greet me. We appreciate your time. Please sit. I sat across from my father. The air was thick with unspoken history. Mr. Hale began. Frank, we've reviewed your case. It's troubling. The company's losses, the compliance failures, the media fallout, it's created instability for the bank. My father nodded once, jaw tight. I understand. Hale turned to me. Emma, you've demonstrated exceptional judgment under pressure. Your management of EC Holdings, your ability to turn around failing assets is exactly what we need. We'd like to appoint you as an external advisor to the restructuring process. My father's head snapped up. You're giving her my company? No, Hale said calmly. We're giving her the chance to save what's left of it. The silence that followed was suffocating. My father's eyes burned into mine, not with hatred, but with something far worse. Disbelief. I spent my life building that name, he said quietly. And now you're here to finish it off. I held his gaze. I'm here to rebuild it, Dad. You taught me how. The meeting ended with polite applause and handshakes, the kind of ceremony that meant everything and nothing at once. When it was over, I walked out into the bright winter sunlight. I should have felt triumphant, victorious. But as I stepped onto the sidewalk, the truth settled heavy in my chest. Winning didn't feel like flying. It felt like standing on a mountain built from the rubble of everything you used to love. The silence of the ascent was deafening. That night, Grace called again. "So it's done." "It's done," I said. She was silent for a long time. Then she whispered, "You sound like someone who just lost something they spent their whole life chasing." "Maybe I did," I said softly. "Maybe I chased power, and what I caught was just a very complicated form of responsibility." Outside the city glittered under the winter sky. And somewhere out there, my father's empire, the one built on pride and power, now had my name on its walls. The tables had turned, but the weight of victory was heavier than I ever imagined. The first week after the board meeting felt like walking through a dream I hadn't meant to create. My name was everywhere. Financial magazines, talk shows, social media. Emma Collins takes control of her father's legacy. The daughter who saved then surpassed her father. They called it poetic justice. I called it exhaustion. Every morning I woke up to a dozen interview requests, and every night I lay awake wondering when I had stopped being a daughter and become a headline. At the office, my team celebrated the new contracts rolling in. Clients who had once ignored me now called first. Journalists praised my financial brilliance and composure under fire. But beneath all that noise, I couldn't ignore the hollow space forming inside me. Because while the world was busy applauding my triumph, I couldn't stop thinking about the man who had lost everything to make it happen. One afternoon, Grace came by unannounced. She walked in holding 2 cups of coffee, and that look she gave me whenever she thought I needed saving from myself. "You look like hell," she said, gently setting the coffee down. "I feel like it," I admitted. She sat across from me. "You did what you had to do. You didn't destroy him. He destroyed himself." I looked out the window. Maybe. But I didn't stop it either. Grace tilted her head. "Would he have stopped it for you?" The thought felt like the only currency I had left. "No," I said finally, the admission cold and clean. And that's the difference. That night I drove again to Fort Worth. My father's house looked smaller, older. The porch light flickered. I found him in the kitchen. My mother, Evelyn, was standing by the sink, hands folded, looking weary but relieved to see me. "He hasn't moved from this room all day," she whispered. Then she left the room, giving us the silence we needed. He was sitting at the table, papers spread across it, a half-empty bottle of bourbon beside him. He looked up when I entered. "The prodigal daughter returns," he said dryly. "I brought you something." I set a file on the table. He eyed it warily. "What's this, a restructuring plan?" "For the company. You still own shares. You can rebuild Dad. Just differently." He snorted. "Under your supervision." "No," I said softly. "Under your name. But with honesty this time." He laughed, a bitter, rasping sound. "You talk like you've never made a mistake." "I've made plenty," I said, "but I've learned to own them." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy but not angry, more like 2 people standing on the edges of an old bridge, wondering if it could still hold their weight. He finally leaned back, staring at the file. "You remind me of your grandfather," he said. "He built things from nothing. Then one bad decision took it all away. I used to swear I'd never end up like him." I met his eyes. "Maybe you didn't. Maybe you just ended up like you." He smiled, faintly, weary but genuine. "I deserve that." We talked for hours that night, not about business, but about everything that came before it. My childhood. The family dinners that always turned into comparisons, the years I spent trying to prove I was enough. For the first time, he listened. When I left, he stood by the door, hands shoved into his pockets. "Emma," he said quietly, "I was wrong. About you. About everything." "I know," I said, "but I needed you to say it." He nodded. "I just wish I'd said it sooner." We walked to the end of the driveway together. The Texas air was sharp and cold. I reached out and touched the old stone pillar of the mailbox, the one with Collins carved into it. It felt cold, heavy, and real. "This still stands," I whispered. I stepped out onto the porch after he went inside, leaning against the cold railing. The night was vast and silent, smelling faintly of pine and the residue of the bourbon he'd been drinking. I closed my eyes, letting the stillness settle the frantic energy inside me. For the first time, the quiet of the night felt like absolution, not just absence. The next morning, I woke to an email from North Star's board. Subject transition approval. They had accepted my plan to restructure the construction division. My father's name would remain on the company, and he would retain a symbolic position as founder emeritus. It was the compromise I hadn't known I needed. But not everyone celebrated. Luke called later that day, his tone sharp and cold. "So this is how it ends. You get the company, the press, and Dad's redemption arc." "Luke, it's not like that." "The hell it isn't," he snapped. "You always wanted to outshine him. Now you did. Congratulations." His bitterness was a different flavor of poison than Dad's pride had been. Luke saw only a score settled, never a wound healed. I stared at my phone, the weight of his words pressing deep. I had fought my way to power, but my family didn't work like markets. There was no chart that measured forgiveness or petty envy. That evening, Nora walked into my office holding a small envelope. "This came for you," she said. It was from my father. Inside was a handwritten note, simple and steady. "You were right, Emma. Winning means nothing if you lose yourself. Don't let the world tell you who you are. You already know." There was a folded newspaper clipping inside. It was an article about women in finance with a highlighted quote. "Success isn't about proving anyone wrong, it's about proving yourself right." My eyes blurred as I read the words. That weekend I didn't work. I turned off my phone, took my car, and drove west until the city disappeared. Somewhere along a quiet stretch of highway, I pulled over by a field glowing gold under the afternoon sun. The wind smelled of earth and dust and distance. I thought about the girl I'd been, the one who sat at the dinner table swallowing humiliation in silence, pretending her dreams didn't matter. I thought about the woman I'd become, the one who could move markets and bend headlines. And I realized something I had spent my whole life chasing: respect from the people least capable of giving it. Back in Dallas, Grace came over with takeout and wine. We sat on the balcony watching the skyline fade into night. "You know what I think," she said, sipping her drink. "You didn't win by beating him. You won by becoming someone who didn't need to." "Maybe I did," I said softly. "Maybe I chased power, and what I caught was just a very complicated form of responsibility." Outside, the city glittered under the winter sky. The wind shifted warm and soft against my face. Somewhere in the distance, the city pulsed with the rhythm of new beginnings. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and whispered to the quiet night, "For once, I don't need to prove anything. I already did." And for the first time, peace didn't feel like surrender. It felt like finally coming home. Thanksgiving came early that year. Maybe it was my mother's idea of peace after everything, or maybe she just couldn't stand another holiday where silence filled the table. Either way, I found myself standing in front of the old house again, staring at the porch light flickering like a heartbeat. The air smelled like roasted turkey cinnamon and the faint memory of what used to be home. When I walked in, the first thing I saw was my father at the head of the table. He looked older but softer, like the weight of everything he'd lost had peeled away the arrogance and left something human behind. My mother, Evelyn, was busy setting dishes. She wore a simple sweater, not the expensive silk she used to favor, and was humming a tune I hadn't heard in years. And Luke, my brother, perfectly dressed as always, was pouring wine, pretending to be unaffected by the tension hanging in the air. "Emma," my mother said, her face brightening. "You made it." "I said I would," I replied. Luke looked up with that practiced smirk. "Of course she did. Wouldn't want to miss a chance to show off." "Luke," my mother warned gently, but he waved her off. I smiled faintly. "Don't worry, Luke. I didn't bring my bank statements." He chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. "Good. Wouldn't want the rest of us to feel like amateurs." The silence that followed was sharp enough to slice through bone. My father cleared his throat, setting down his glass. "Enough. Let's eat." We took our seats, the same arrangement as every Thanksgiving, before Dad at the head, Mom to his right, me across from Luke. Only this time, the invisible lines of power had shifted. As we started eating, my mother tried to fill the air with light conversation. Emma, I read about your latest project. Something about renewable investments, solar infrastructure, I said. We're funding development in rural areas, energy independence for families who've never had stable power. That's wonderful, she said softly. Luke snorted. Sounds expensive. And risky. It's an investment, not a gamble, I replied calmly. Funny, he said, swirling his wine. That's what Dad said before everything went up in smoke. The room froze. My father didn't look up, but I saw his knuckles tighten around the fork. My mother sighed. Luke, please. He leaned back, eyes cold. What I'm just saying, we're celebrating like none of that happened. Like she didn't take over the family name and parade it around Wall Street like her personal redemption arc. My heart thudded, but my voice stayed even. Redemption implies guilt, Luke. I built what you never had the courage to start. He laughed under his breath. Courage, I call it ego. My father finally spoke, his voice low and firm. That's enough. But Luke wasn't done. He turned to him. You made her this way. You always said a man should lead, that success is built on strength. Guess what? She proved you wrong, and now you can't stand it. Dad's face flushed, but his voice didn't rise. I'm proud of your sister. The words dropped like stones into the silence. For a moment no one moved. My fork hovered midair. My mother blinked, surprised. Even Luke seemed thrown off balance. You're what he asked. My father looked at me, then his eyes steady. Proud. Of her. For surviving every storm I threw her into. For becoming everything I wasn't brave enough to be. The room went still except for the faint crackle of the fireplace. My mother's hand covered his. Frank, she whispered, but he didn't look away from me. You were right, he said softly. About business, about family, about me. The tightness in my chest loosened just a little. You don't have to say that. Yes, I do. He exhaled, voice rough. I spent half my life trying to make you smaller so I could feel big. But you were never meant to be small. Luke looked between us, disbelief twisting his face. Luke pushed his chair back abruptly, his voice cracking. You both deserve each other. You think your solar panels and your billions make you better. You just bought Dad's love. The door slammed behind him. The echo lingered long after he was gone. No one spoke for a while. My mother wiped her eyes quietly. My father reached for his glass, his hand shaking slightly. I didn't mean for it to end like this, he said finally. I just wanted my children to be strong. You did that, I said. Just not the way you thought. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Maybe that's the only kind of legacy that matters. We ate in silence after that, comfortable this time. The air felt lighter, the walls less haunted. When dessert came, my mother lit a small candle and smiled through tears. You know, this might be the first dinner in years where we didn't end up yelling. I laughed softly. There's still time. Even my father chuckled at that. Later, after the dishes were done and my mother had gone to bed, he and I stepped outside. The air was crisp, the stars sharp and cold above us. He handed me a small box. This was your grandfather's, he said quietly. He left it for me, but I think it belongs to you. I opened it. Inside was an old brass compass, its glass cracked, its needle trembling. He used to say, my father murmured, that no matter how lost you get, the needle always points true north. You just have to be brave enough to follow it. I turned the compass in my hand, the light catching on its worn edges. Maybe I'll keep it on my desk, I said, to remind me where I came from. He smiled faintly. Just don't forget where you're going. I stood on the porch for a while, watching the wind move through the trees. Luke's anger was just noise now. It couldn't touch me because I wasn't selling anything. The money was the tool. The true north was the self-worth I'd built in silence. As I drove home that night, the road glowed with the reflection of streetlights, the compass lying beside me on the seat. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to win. I just felt steady. When I got home, I placed the compass on my desk right beside my glowing trading monitors. the old brass and the cold glass, my two kinds of truth. I stared at both for a long moment, then whispered into the quiet room, I finally do. And somewhere deep inside, I knew the next time we sat around that family table, I wouldn't be the one trying to prove anything. I'd just be the one who finally found her true north. A year later, the world looked different. The chaos had faded, the headlines had softened, and my name, once splashed across every business page, was now a quiet footnote in the back of success stories. And I preferred it that way. I woke up in my home overlooking the Pacific Ocean, the kind of view that made every mistake feel like part of the plan. The sound of the waves against the rocks below was steady and familiar, like breathing. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and smiled at the flood of messages from my foundation's team. We had just funded our 100th scholarship for women studying finance. A full-circle moment. The girl who had once been told no man wanted a woman who earned less was now helping other women earn more and never have to hear that sentence again. As I sipped my coffee, my phone buzzed. A message from Grace. They're replaying your old CNBC interview. You were fierce. I texted back, that girl was angry. This one's just grateful. I spent the morning reviewing proposals for a new project, clean energy startups led by single mothers. It was the kind of work that didn't make headlines but changed lives in quiet, lasting ways. When I finally closed my laptop, I looked at the small brass compass on my desk, the one my father had given me that Thanksgiving night. Its cracked glass caught the light, and for a moment I could almost hear his voice. He is doing better now. Not rich again, content. After losing everything, he'd found something simpler, teaching construction safety at a community college. Every now and then, he'd call to tell me about his students, about how proud he was when one of them landed a job. Mom and I talked more often, too. She'd softened over time, no longer measuring worth in titles or incomes. She came to visit that spring, sitting on my porch for hours watching the ocean, her eyes full of things she never said aloud. You built something beautiful, she told me one evening, her voice trembling. Not just the house, Emma. Your life. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at her and smiled. I had a lot to unlearn first. After she left, I spent nights walking along the beach thinking about how strange time was, how it bends and heals, how it turns anger into understanding if you let it. One night, under a sky so clear it looked endless, I received a call from Luke. It had been almost 6 months since we'd spoken. His voice was hesitant, softer than I remembered. Hey, sis. I froze, then smiled faintly. Hey. I just wanted to say, I was an ass, he said. All those years I thought you were trying to outshine me. Turns out you were just trying to survive. I leaned against the porch railing, the sound of the ocean filling the silence between us. We both did what we thought we had to do. Maybe he said, but you did it better. I'm sorry for the way I treated you. I felt something in me loosen, the last thread of resentment snapping quietly. Apology accepted. Dad told me about the scholarship fund, he said. That's incredible. I smiled. It's not about me anymore. Still, he said, his voice warm now. You did good, Emma. After we hung up, I stood there for a long time, letting the ocean wind tangle my hair, the stars above reflecting off the waves like scattered diamonds. The next morning, I had lunch with Grace at a small cafe downtown. She'd just published a piece titled, The Quiet Power of Female Resilience, and though it wasn't about me by name, I could see the fingerprints of my story all over it. You know what the best part of your story is? She said, stirring her coffee. It's not the billions or the business. It's that you walked through fire and didn't come out burning everyone else. For a long time, I thought revenge meant making them regret everything. Now I think it just means living a life they can't deny. Grace smiled. That's not revenge, Emma. That's just becoming untethered. That night back home, I sat on the balcony watching the sunset bleed into the water. The sky burned orange and gold, fading into violet. I thought about everything that had brought me here. The dinners that ended in laughter. I had to fake the rejections that fueled me, the moments I swallowed pride, because I had to play the long game. I thought about that Christmas dinner years ago when my father leaned across the table and said, "No man wants a woman who earns less." And I thought about how wrong he'd been. No man had ever given me what I had now. No one had handed me peace, respect, or power. I'd earned them myself. The doorbell rang just as the last light faded. I opened the door to find my father standing there holding a small box. "I was in town," he said. "Thought I'd stop by." "Come in," I said, smiling. He set the box on the table. Inside was an old photo me at 12 sitting at his desk pretending to type on his calculator. He laughed softly. "You always wanted to be in charge." "I guess I did." He nodded. "You've done more than I ever dreamed possible. But I want you to know something, Emma. You didn't prove me wrong, you taught me what right actually looks like." My throat tightened. "Thank you." He smiled, eyes glinting with pride. "You're my best investment." After he left, I sat there staring at the photo, my chest full of something I hadn't felt in years, peace that wasn't borrowed from success. Outside, the ocean moved with its steady rhythm, endless and untamed. I picked up my phone and opened the draft of a post I'd been meaning to share on my foundation's page. It read, "To every woman who has ever been underestimated, thank you. You're the proof that silence isn't weakness, that grace isn't surrender, and that the only metric for success that matters is the one you build for yourself. You are not defined by who pays your bills." I hit post. Then I stepped outside, letting the wind brush across my face. The horizon was glowing faintly with the first stars of the night. Somewhere out there, I imagined the younger version of myself, the girl at that dinner table holding back tears, wondering if she'd ever be enough. I wanted to tell her she would be, that one day the very words that tried to break her would become her armor, that her quiet revenge would echo louder than any insult ever thrown at her. I closed my eyes and whispered into the dark, "You made it. You are enough." And the sweetest revenge was simply standing tall long after they stopped looking.